The blast was part of a large cutback of the open-pit mine's eastern wall, which is being remediated following severe rock falls that occurred in May 2018. Work to strip the wall back by about 100 meters began last year, and is expected to take at least 3 years. The authority's new chairman Matthew Tontz is preparing to visit Exmouth next month, where locals will have a final chance to provide input into a wide-ranging review of the impact of development and activity on Exmouth Gulf. In August 2020, Environment Minister Stephen Dawson asked the EPA to review the potential cumulative impacts of current and future activities proposed for the Gulf. The Chinese state-owned Shenhua Energy made an 11th-hour application for a mining license to the NSW government in June 2020, which remains under review. Earlier this week, Mr. Barilaro said the financial landscape for the mine was different to when it was first proposed more than a decade ago. Mr. Allen said the new network of seismic monitors, which will bolster a less sophisticated temporary network already up and running in the Beetaloo region, will detect and locate natural seismic activity, such as earthquakes in the area, as well as human-induced seismicity as a result of hydraulic fracturing. Many of the women called for Tinder and other dating apps to be more accountable for sexual violence that takes place after people connect on their platforms. The South Australian campaign aims to raise awareness about predatory behaviour involved in sexual violence, and to link victims and perpetrators with further information and support. A construction company has subjected residents to months of sleepless nights, noisily working well into the early hours of the morning, without a permit from the Brisbane City Council. Broad Construction and other contractors are working day and night to finish the construction of the new Brisbane South State Secondary College in Dutton Park, set to open next week. The share of non-English speakers has been rising steadily for more than 3 decades. U.S. residents today are nearly twice as likely to speak a language other than English at home as residents in 1980, for instance. The census doesn't have as much long-term data on the percent of adult citizens speaking something other than English. Mona has always pushed the boundaries, particularly with its midwinter festival, Dark Mofo. Drawing tourists to Hobart during the coldest and darkest time of the year is no mean feat, especially with the debate Dark Mofo has frequently created. Despite its determination to be different, Mona and its crowd-drawing festivals have come to be embraced by state governments. There are 28 invasive native species in the western region, and renewed carbon estimates there are 24 million tons of it, within a 75-kilometre radius of Cobar. Mr. Van Herk said to remove the invasive species, it cost landholders more money per hectare than their land was worth. The firm is encouraging all Queensland residents who paid for electricity between January 2015 and January 2021 to register to be reimbursed. According to Piper Alderman's website, unlawful conduct occurred at the generation stage and your retailer simply passed that cost through to you. People's Choice Credit Union customers said the outage began on Sunday, and that they had not been able to log into their accounts since then. Others said they had been able to sign in after waiting several minutes, although they could not see their transaction history. The state government and City of Gold Coast have each contributed $350,000 towards the project. But a motoring journalist with 40 years' experience has warned that the widespread adoption of EVs would remain a pipe dream unless state and federal governments provided better incentives. The Australian government announced the legislation last month, after an investigation found the tech giants held too much market power in the media industry, a situation it said posed a potential threat to a well-functioning democracy. In response, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg said in a statement that the government was not backing down. Three of the world's biggest miners, including BHP, could be forced to close down Latin America's largest open-pit mine, with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, set to investigate environmental destruction and alleged human rights abuses. The probe comes just months after the United Nations called on BHP. South Australia's circular economy of recycled waste is set to receive a $45 million infrastructure injection following a joint announcement by the federal and state governments today. SA Environment Minister David Spears said both governments would each contribute $15 million towards expanding the state's recycling infrastructure, with industry expected to provide an additional $15 million. Scott Morrison's first agenda item after his summer holiday was not a return to dealing with the coronavirus crisis from the confines of Parliament House, but a tour of outback communities, trying to bounce back from years of drought and the devastating 2019 floods. With a full tank of fuel in her Piper Cherokee Arrow, Dr. Scott can travel from the runway on her property, which is 80 kilometres from White Cliffs in far west New South Wales, north to the Queensland border or south to the Victorian or South Australian one, and everywhere in between. The furthest I've flown to a job has been about 1,000 kilometres away, she said. According to Universities Australia, the peak body for the sector, more than 140,000 higher education international students were unable to study domestically after borders shut to international travellers last year. The exodus of students to their home countries, or unable to return to Australia, has devastated the Australian economy across the education, accommodation, and hospitality. In a statement, People's Choice acknowledged customers were experiencing slower than normal connection speeds for their internet banking and mobile banking app, leading to many of them abandoning their attempts to log on. It said there were no issues with banking, phone banking, branches, or people using cards. Mars was named by the ancient Romans for their god of war, because its reddish color was reminiscent of blood. Other civilizations also named the planet for this attribute. For example, the Egyptians called it Erdesha, meaning the red one. Even today, it is frequently called the red planet because iron minerals in the Martian dirt oxidize, or rust, causing the surface to look red. A large canyon system called Valles Marineris is long enough to stretch from California to New York, more than 3,000 miles, 4,800 kilometers. This Martian canyon is 200 miles, 320 kilometers, at its widest and 4.3 miles, 7 kilometers, at its deepest. That's about 10 times the size of Earth's Grand Canyon. In China, food and festivals are often linked, and the food carries good wishes. Ibec and the other international students bought high-quality grains online from Liaoning province. They cooked the laba congee together to thank their teachers for helping them spend the year 2020 safely and in good health. A team of Chinese paleontologists has identified more than 240 fossilized dinosaur footprints in East China's Fujian province, the first traces of dinosaur activity found in the province. The site of the dinosaur tracks in Shanghang County, covering an area of about 1,600 square meters, is the largest and the most diverse such site dating back to the Upper Cretaceous period. These new findings help to explain some of the puzzling geological features that surround the Imbrium Basin. The work also suggests, based on the sizes of other impact basins in the Moon, Mars and Mercury, that the early solar system was likely well stocked with protoplanet-sized asteroids. The vertical gun range employs a 14-foot cannon that fires small projectiles at up to 16,000 miles per hour, while impact plates and high-speed cameras record the ballistic dynamics. During his experiments with low-angle impacts, Schultz noticed that impactors tend to start breaking apart when they first make contact with the surface. Between 10 and 12% of Americans claim to trace their lineage back to the colonists that sailed from England on the Mayflower in 1620. Conventional wisdom has it that they named their landing place Plymouth, after the English town from which they sailed. In the early stages of their careers, people often try to learn from the experience of others because they lack experience themselves. They observe role models or study well-known leaders. They seek advice from experienced leaders or read case studies and biographies about how they achieved success. Role models and their successful experiences provide invaluable guidance. The ship was contracted and boarded in Rotherhithe, however, from where the Mayflower sailed to Southampton, 150 miles east of Plymouth. Here, more passengers embarked, and the Mayflower was joined by a sister ship called the Speedwell, which had brought emigrants for the trip from the Netherlands. Despite the unique talents of its central figure, Chasing the Flame tells of more tragedies than triumphs. While allowing the reader to share in radiant moments of victory, it also reveals how, despite his unquenchable energy and brilliant vision, Vieira de Mello often failed to bring about the peace and justice that he fervently desired to give to the people around him. In the 1600s, most ships were merchant ships. They were made for carrying cargo, like barrels of food or cloth, large pieces of wood, and casks of wine, from one place to another to be sold. Before Mayflower sailed to New England, it had been sailing around Europe carrying wine and cloth. Scientists already knew a huge space rock created the right eye of the fabled man in the moon, but they had no idea how big. A new scientific report published Wednesday contends that an asteroid roughly the size of New Jersey slammed into the moon some 3.8 billion years ago. The asteroid at 150 miles across is about 10 times bigger than previous estimates. Early Earth suffered constant threat of attack from leftover planet-building material. From about 4.5 to 3.8 billion years ago, failed planets and smaller asteroids slammed into larger worlds, scarring their surface. Near the end of the violence, during a period known as the Late Heavy Bombardment, impacts in the solar system may have increased. Existing antibiotics target essential bacterial functions, including nucleic acid and protein synthesis, building of the cell membrane, and metabolic pathways. However, bacteria can acquire drug resistance by mutating the bacterial target the antibiotic is directed against, inactivating the drugs or pumping them out. Quantitative research is the process of collecting numerical data through standardized techniques, then applying statistical methods to derive insights from it. The goal of quantitative research methods is to collect numerical data from a group of people, then generalize those results to a larger group of people to explain a phenomenon. Artificial lights raise night sky luminance, creating the most visible effect of light pollution, artificial sky glow. Despite the increasing interest among scientists in fields such as ecology, astronomy, healthcare, and land use planning, light pollution lacks a current quantification of its magnitude on a global scale. The development of science and technology, this splendid testimony of the human capacity for understanding and for perseverance, does not free humanity from the obligation to ask the ultimate religious questions. Rather, it spurs us on to face the most painful and decisive of struggles, those of the heart and of the moral conscience. In contrast, unconditional self-worth is distinct from our abilities and accomplishments. It's not about comparing ourselves to others, it's not something that we can have more or less of. Unconditional self-worth is the sense that you deserve to be alive, to be loved and cared for. To take up space. Low self-worth can leave us feeling isolated and alone. When we think there's something wrong with us, we tend to pull away from our relationships, and this isolation only exacerbates our feelings of unworthiness. Knowing that we are not alone in our struggles and pain reminds us that challenges don't make us unworthy. "41-year-old Joachim Olsen is a former world-class shot putter. With 10 straight international finals, Olsen holds the longest string of appearances in finals at Olympic, World and European Championships among throwers. He was elected to the Danish Parliament in 2011. At 7.5% of the vote, the Libertarian Liberal Alliance is a junior party in the government. Observation allows researchers to experience a specific aspect of social life and get a first-hand look at a trend, institution, or behavior. Participant observation involves the researcher joining a sample of individuals without interfering with that group's normal activities, in order to document their routine behavior, or observe them in a natural context. As recently as a century ago, most of us could walk outside of a night and gaze up at star-filled skies. Artificial light in and around buildings, on advertising screens and billboards, plus those lining streets and illuminating sporting venues, means we usually have to travel to achieve that same sense of wonder. To the growing global middle class, travel was no longer the out-of-reach luxury it once was. As the barriers to travel diminished, our desire to explore the world increased. An increase in the number of airlines and flights made it easier and cheaper to get to once exotic places. Websites, blogs and social media made it a snap to research what to do in your destination. Sleep is a necessary restorative process for our minds and bodies, and no matter how busy we are, we need sleep. While we sleep, our brains catalog information and heal our bodies. The sleeping brain decides what's important to hold onto, and what can be let go of. Our brains create new pathways that help us navigate the day ahead. Narcissism is sometimes thought to be paradoxical because grandiose and vulnerable narcissism, two subtypes of this personality construct, seem to involve inconsistent personality features. Grandiose narcissism is characterized by extroverted self-absorption, low neuroticism, and high self-esteem, whereas vulnerable narcissism is marked by introverted self-absorption, high neuroticism. It's time we celebrated healthy sleep patterns, instead of shaming each other for sleeping 8 hours a night. We need to encourage friends, family members, and co-workers to adopt a healthy sleep schedule. If we are in leadership positions, we need to set a healthy example, and encourage employees to take care of their mental and physical health by sleeping. This is the most common way to collect quantitative data. A questionnaire, also called a survey, is a series of questions, usually written on paper or a digital form. Researchers give the questionnaire to their sample, and each participant answers the questions. The questions are designed to gather data that will help researchers answer their research questions. TV show, with celebrities, drama and comedy, highlight significant relics from China's rich history. Variety and reality shows have captured increasing audience numbers recently, and the appeal of cultural heritage program is growing among those watching either on TV or through online streaming media platforms. Unlike the most common English scripts for young readers on the market, which are based on adaptations of European and American stories, Those presented in this book are unique for being based on classic Chinese stories, readapted and written in English. The book is divided into first to third grades, in terms of grammar and vocabulary difficulty. Colors take on different meaning in different times and places. Red can convey a wide range of symbolic meanings including status, power, marriage, and affiliation with sports teams, the Conservative Republican Party in the US, and the Communist Party in China. Find out about how colors can create shared identity, and the many uses of red throughout human history. Some objects reflect only certain colors of light, while others make their own colored light. Find out how objects can produce color in many different ways, depending on how they interact with light, and how people have searched for pigments and dyes to make their lives more colorful, in the Blue Room.